Good morning. I'm Raleigh Flynn. I'm the president of the Foreign Policy Research Institute in Philadelphia, a nonpartisan think tank. And we would like to welcome you to our program this morning. We're going to be talking about the Black Sea region, the complex Black Sea region, which has become an even greater area of interest because of great power competition. We have a star-studded panel this morning, including General Ben Hodges, who was the former commander of NATO Allied Land Command, as well as Ambassador Batu Katelia and Ambassador Vasil Sikaroulidze, who are both associated with the Atlantic Council of Georgia. Here this morning to moderate our discussion, we have our very own Maya Otarashvili, who is the Deputy Director of the Eurasia Program, as well as our Deputy Director of Research. We're going to be turning this over to her momentarily, but as part of the program, we'll also be taking your questions. So be sure to put those in the Q&A box if you have any questions to ask our panelists this morning. I'd also like to thank those of you who are our members and supporters. We can't do these programs without you. And as you know, FPRI gives you the story behind the story, something you do not get in the regular media, even the cable news network. So please, if you're not already supporting us, please consider doing so. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Maya Otarashvili.
Thank you so much, Raleigh. Thank you for making those remarks, and welcome to our audience and to our panelists, of course. I don't want to go too much into everyone's bios. That information is available on our website. All I want to say is I am so delighted that we were able to arrange such an excellent, remarkable group of speakers today. And I want to ask Mr. Linas Linkevicius to go first because he does have limited time, and we were just so delighted to have him join us. He has been the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Lithuania since December 2012. And in 2012, he was also appointed, previously to this job, he was appointed as ambassador to Belarus. He has served as the ambassador at large for the Transatlantic Cooperation and Security Policy Department in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Lithuania as well. He is a dear friend of many of the countries in the Black Sea region that we will be talking about. I think his experience and expertise will be very useful for our discussion today. Before I turn it over to you, Mr. Minister, I want to thank our partners at the Atlantic Council of Georgia for co-organizing this event, for bringing this event idea to us. We are really delighted to be working with Dato Sikaroulidze and Batu Katelia on our Black Sea initiative, and I look forward to many more discussions like this. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Mr. Minister, and then we can go into our panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Maya. Thank you for a nice introduction. Also very glad to see old familiar faces, although it's virtually, but it's not so big difference. We are like-minded and definitely we can talk. Although I can say that I cannot feel a big expert in Black Sea affairs, but since we're talking about the same threats, the same challenges, basically, we really can share our expertise, our experience, and especially, most important, what we have to do. So when we're talking about Black Sea security, and unavoidably we have to set the scene what happened in 2008, and that was a wake-up call, which was not enough for many people to wake up. But in 2008, that was big drama and occupation of 20% of Georgian territory, which still continues. And as we can see, not much lessons were drawn from that, because after that it was Crimea, occupation, annexation. It's also related to the Black Sea region. So unfortunately, and very sad to say that not so many places elsewhere were more miles of coastline under illegal occupation. So this is really big tension. And when we're talking about Black Sea as a theater, this is also a test polygon for Russia to test patience, to test our resilience, to test our even methods or even time of reaction. And there's plenty of leverages in the possession, unfortunately, I have to say, which is really testing NATO's collective defense potential. We have 3 NATO members around: Bulgaria, Romania, Turkey. Sometimes different to agree on the same approach. It's also a big challenge, and we know the peculiarities of all these 3, especially Turkey. They have their own national interests, sometimes taking this as a national challenge, what's happening in Black Sea. And this is I have to say. So Russia also have a potential in trying to do that, to control ports, sea lanes. This is not Black Sea, but Azov Sea became like they pretended this to be as a inland water, and which is really a big challenge for many. And recent events with the ships, with the British ship, and this incident was something which could be repeated in the future as well. So what we have to do, and in the NATO summit it was discussed. Unfortunately, I have to say, Georgia and Ukraine were not invited this time because the summit was shorter and formats was limited. So there was no NATO Ukraine Council, no NATO Georgia Council, but nevertheless, Black Sea issues were discussed quite a lot. And let's hope it will happen. So everybody agrees there should be more presence in the Black Sea, more footprint, so to say, not only on the Black Sea, but also seaport visits are important. Training exercises are important. Maybe we have to also to encourage our friends in Georgia to develop a more as a role as a strategic hub, as a transition hub, to develop relationship with the other NATO countries. In particular, it's very important cooperation with Ukraine. Again, knowing nuances of the policy and knowing that there are some tensions and misunderstandings and disagreements on some political figures. Let's mention Misha Saakashvili in this regard. But we always try to encourage that very important to overcome that, because this cooperation, close cooperation, is important. And when President Zelensky and Prime Minister of Georgia established kind of council, strategic council of cooperation, maybe that's a sign of readiness to exchange, to build together, and really to try to develop all these things together. It has to do with military again, and maybe General Hodges will be more in a position to explain, but in my view, it looks like there are some objective limitations which not allowing to use Black Sea in full, so to say, spectrum of our capabilities, capacities, have in mind also presence. There are a lot of bureaucratic and technical limitations, like Montreux Convention, for instance. And as we know, this is limited access and time for non-literal NATO states to deploy ships, and that's used by those countries which are really trying to abuse the situation. And again, we remember recent tensions, and where there was also a good lesson maybe for the future when United States came in and tried to threaten even for possibility to deploy warships, additional warships in the Black Sea, then canceled this decision, and immediately, I mean, really immediately next day, Russians sent 15 warships into the Black Sea, showing that really this competition in this way is not going to happen. So when talking about Black Sea security, also very important to have a wider picture, and I mean accession to NATO perspectives. And here, very briefly, I'd like to mention that I'm always repeating that when talking to Georgian friends, and Batu knows that quite well what I'm saying. So we are trying sometimes to overplay bureaucratic maybe schemes, not understanding what is in the essence of our relationship in the nature, but in the nature is very positive. I mean, in terms of leverages, in terms of instruments in our possession. And again, I mentioned NATO Georgia Council. It was not possible to organize the highest level meeting during the summit, but that will happen later, definitely. And special council, this is also a very important signal of strong cooperation. This is also a package of support, training facilities, and this annual national program, which is not membership action plan, but in fact, by structure, is almost the same. and Georgia receives very decent and candid feedback about development of the forces, about the force planning. That's very important. So not wasting time, that's to say, in preparing country for the membership, because this is really takes time, and we all understand that this has to do with political decision. So map is not given, as we understand. Unfortunately, there's no consensus on that. But we should remember that what was decided in 2008 in Bucharest NATO summit. Georgia will be NATO member. It remains. But you know, when I'm comparing documents, we can also discuss that. Remember this 2008 summit. I remember this very hot debates when this sentence appeared on the document of NATO summit, that NATO and Ukraine will be members of NATO. Full stop. Right at that time, there's big fight. I remember there were voices saying that let's add that if they wish so, or something like that. But no, we said it should be like that. They will be members of NATO. Eventually, as we remember later, it was deleted with regard to the Ukraine for obvious reasons. Now we're happy to say that it's again back. But at that time, it was said they will be members, and all these map conditions. Preconditions could be found in the between lines of that document. Now we have explicitly, clearly saying that in the same sentence, besides the fact that they will be members, this obligatory part of membership action plan. So I would suggest to our Georgian friends not to overplay with that, because you have promise of future membership. That means you have future members. That's very big promise, I have to say. Time will come when political consensus will appear, and difficult to judge when it will happen. So you have not to waste time, not to blame anybody, not to point to anybody, but just to make full use of the leverages I just mentioned, and they are not all, there are much more, many of them, to continue with the reforms, which is not only has to do with the military, I have to say, because alliance is not just military alliance, also military political alliance, and economic reforms, rule of law, democracy, and all that stuff is also not less important. So you really should really improve something what should be accomplished and what was not done in the past. And then when time will come unavoidably, and we will be happy to welcome you by the table. But now it's not the case, so you shouldn't overplay with bureaucratic plans and mechanisms. Place yourself in the kind of situation of loser sometimes, when you're asking for something and not getting it, creates opinion or impression that something is wrong, but which is not true. It's not fair, to say the least. So it should be changing the tactics and continue to go along this way. Let's not forget also European Union. We are not talking about European Union much, but association trio also appreciate these efforts to cooperate between Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia. I believe we will be able to add also this defense segment into this dialogue, and association with common foreign security policy, and as a part of that, common defense policy of European Union, associate with the institutions or centers of excellence, like Fusion Center, for instance, of hybrid threats, like Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, like possibility in the future, I hope we will be able to engage in the PESCO structural cooperation projects, everything getting implicit security guarantees and more association, political association with the Western structures, with Euro-Atlantic community, so to say. So I hope that my time should be limited. I cannot speak too long, but my points are that theater where we are playing is really very complicated, because lawlessness fights with those who are playing according to the rules. So we have to take into account. I am not calling for unfair play, but I'm just calling to take into account that we should provide clear, tangible arguments on the ground. Otherwise, other side will not take them seriously. We shouldn't place ourselves in the position of loser, I would repeat, but just to win, to be able to celebrate what we achieved, because achieved was a lot, and definitely to continue to keep up motivation among the population as well. And that's the case. So I hope time will come, and we'll be happy to welcome Georgia in the Euro-Atlantic family in full capacity. Although it will not be difficult, but that will come. And let's not shy away from this very important choice. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we needed this positive, upbeat message, especially at this time, not just for the Black Sea region, but also specifically for Georgia with the current developments that are going on there. And there is a lot of sense of hopelessness. So thank you for that positive message. I will turn it over to General Hodges, then Batu and Dato, so we can have our initial remarks and then go into our discussion. I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So I would like to ask our audience members to start thinking about their questions for our experts and send them in using the Q&A feature. You can send in your questions at any time, and I will be sure to get to as many of them as possible. So General Hodges.
Maya, thank you. And what a privilege to follow somebody like former Minister Linkevičius of Lithuania, who has led by personal example in all domains, particularly for security and stability in the Baltic region, but throughout NATO, and also in support of Belarus. And so I'm happy to be on a panel with him, as well as distinguished Georgian diplomats and friends. This is about great power competition. And I do believe that great power competition prevents great power conflict if we compete in all domains: diplomacy, information, lawfare, economy, as well as military. And it prevents conflict because when the nations of the alliance and the European Union and our partners combine efforts in all of those domains, there's no way that the Kremlin or the Chinese Communist Party could effectively compete back. And it removes all doubt that this area is important for us. And that way we reduce the chances of misunderstanding. The reason we have Russian troops sitting in Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, and Ukraine and Moldova today is because we have not competed in the past. And so the Kremlin accurately perceived that we wouldn't do anything about it. And we haven't. As exactly as Lena said, starting with Russia's modernization program, which began in 2007, and their invasion of Georgia in 2008, they have continued to march because they saw that we, the West, did nothing, not really, after the invasion of Georgia. Russian troops are still there 13 years later. They saw that the West, specifically the United States, France, and UK, and Germany did nothing after the Assad regime, supported by the Kremlin, jumped over President Obama's red lines against using chemical weapons. They saw we did nothing. And then in 2014, they invaded Ukraine, illegally annexed Crimea. And frankly, we've done nothing to influence Russian behavior. NATO got much better. NATO got serious about defending our allies. That was significant. And we've done some things to help Ukraine, but we haven't done anything collectively that really influenced Kremlin behavior, as evidenced by the massive Russian buildup here over the last 2 months in and around Ukraine. And of course, all those troops are still there. And I'm afraid it's going to be a long, hot summer in the Black Sea region because none of those troops went home. Really not. I don't think there's a lieutenant in anybody's army believes what Minister Shoigu said, that the exercise is over and everybody went back to barracks. Nobody believes that. And the Kremlin is counting on our past performance of failing to really hold them accountable. They know that August is time for summer holidays in much of Europe, especially Germany, and elections in Germany in September. And so they feel pretty confident. And also because the United States is so interested in the Pacific, they feel pretty confident that we're not going to do anything, unfortunately. And that's why I think you're going to see them continuing their activities in and around Ukraine. I think we're going to see the violence, aggressive action coming back probably in August, late August or September. Obviously, I hope I'm completely wrong, but if we don't change what we are doing, then I think that's what's going to happen. Now, what should we do? Three things. First, what the U.S. should do. Second, what NATO should do. Third, what Georgia and other Black Sea nations must do. And I want to make these will be wave top so that we can keep moving and get to Q&A, but I want to put some ideas on the table real fast. What should the United States do? Number one, we have got to develop a strategy for the Black Sea region. Georgia is not an island. Ukraine is not an island. We have got to have a strategy where we compete in all those domains in the Black Sea and then resource it properly. We've got to figure out how to get the initiative. Quit responding or reacting to whatever the Kremlin does. We should get them back on their heels. We should be investing economically, significantly in the region. And we should also look for opportunities to put, I think, some infrastructure on the ground in Georgia, if Georgia were to invite us, that would enable easier rotational movement of U.S. air and ground forces. The United States, we have got to fix our relationship with Turkey. Look at the map. The geography will never change, and strategy is about the map, and it's about interest. It can't be based on emotion. And so we have got to think beyond the current regime, think about how important that relationship is. And of course, we need to have strong bilateral relationships with Georgia and Ukraine. And the United States has got to advocate for Georgia coming into NATO. I don't think we need membership action plan. That was appropriate 15 years ago. It's a different time now. And there's nothing about MAP in the Washington Treaty. This is an administrative decision. And I think that should not be a prerequisite. But I agree with the minister that Georgia, that we should not be wringing our hands. We just need to put our head down and get to work on fixing these things. What should NATO and the EU do? Develop a strategy for the Black Sea region. There is huge economic potential in Georgia and in the Black Sea region if we can step back from the map and realize that there are 3 east-west economic corridors between Eurasia and Europe. One goes through Russia, one goes through Iran, and one goes through the Caucasus and across the Black Sea. There is huge economic potential, which of course is why Russia is doing everything they can to prevent us from investing in Georgia. And then finally, NATO has got to figure out a way to improve naval presence in the Black Sea. The minister is right, of course, Montreux Convention does have limitations, but to date, we don't even use 50% of the available time that we could be in the Black Sea. This is a reflection of priorities. And that's what we got to raise a priority to get more ships. And then finally, what should Georgia do? Georgia, number one, has to make sure it is ready to defend itself, to be indigestible, taking advantage of the terrain and the incredibly tough soldiers that Georgia produces, but also Georgian society has got to be much more resilient. What happened last week with the attack on the Pride marchers is absolutely unacceptable. The fact that the prime minister did nothing to protect those people, this is unacceptable. And it makes it difficult for the friends of Georgia to fight for Georgia when this is the image that the world sees. Now, of course, my own country, we have got to do a better job setting the example. And I think what President Biden is doing to make sure that we are protecting our own liberal democratic institutions, which are under attack every day in the United States. This is liberal democracy is not a ballet. It's a fight every day. So Georgia has got to fight just like the United States has got to fight. And then finally, Georgia has got to make sure that it is open for business. It has to be more attractive for European and American investors. That means transparency, trust in the judicial processes, trust in the infrastructure development so that people will invest there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think there is a lot to discuss in those remarks. So I look forward to going a little bit deeper into those talking points. So I will turn it over to Batu next, and then after that to Dato.
Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Linus, and thank you, Ben, for your excellent introduction and this setting the scene of different layers of the problem that we see in the Black Sea. We usually speak about, the waves of enlarging the space of freedom, waves of NATO enlargement. So again, it's a more sea terminology. So if Baltic Sea was a NATO issue in the 90s, now I think this fulcrum shifted to the Black Sea. So for this geographic context, I think Black Sea gets more strategic weight, and your points were clearly indicating that that is a momentum, and we have to be ready for this momentum. Before going into the more of the geopolitical issues, I would like to underline the current difficulties Georgia has internally. So notwithstanding the fact that we have a promise of joining NATO, and Georgia did a lot on this path, and I think we deserve to be part of the NATO, still situation is not static. And unfortunately, but Georgia backslides on democracy. That, again, as you perfectly said, General, it makes harder for you, to our friends, to make a Georgia case for a political decision to be made on Georgia's NATO membership. And that's exactly where Russia tries to asymmetrically undermine this, knowing that this consensus stands already more than a decade. And also, until this promise will be fulfilled, it's a grace period for Russia really to act. Maybe not directly undermining the pro-Russia, pro-NATO, pro-Western sentiments in Georgia, because 80% of our public supports, but undermining the degree of democracy that will make automatically Georgia case weaker. On top of it, we have a quite a challenging geopolitical dynamics, notwithstanding that COVID that really posed some kind of, imposed some kind of pause on economic relations. Geopolitics got accelerated in our part of the world. We had a Nagorno-Karabakh war. We have increased Russian presence. We have a quite a significant attempts by Russia to rewrite the history in his, as he called it, near abroad, which openly declares his goals to kind of revise the world order and create spheres of influence. We have naval clashes on the Black Sea, quite an open ones. We have also the energy issues, Nord Stream 2, and we have some regional initiatives like 3+3 or initiative of 6. Well, it's another issue if this math really works, whether 3+3 will be 6 or 5, because so far Georgia really tries not to be part of this initiative. So this is an important geopolitical context, and also we see a huge vacuum, a geopolitical vacuum, and those who will have strategies will fill this vacuum. For Russia, we clearly see that Russia has a quite a coherent, say so, strategy. And I really liked when Maya labeled our event the Tug-of-War on the Black Sea. But I'm wondering if part of Russia's strategy would be just to cut the rope while we are trying to pull sides, and what's gonna happen. So therefore, it will be important to, let's say, disassemble what are the balance between the sides on this rope. On one side, there is a democratic world, NATO, United States, and on the other side, we have autocrats and autocratic alliances around Putin. But if we take a balance sheet, militarily, we are winning because military might is on our side on the Black Sea. Economically, yes, economic might is also on the side of the West and the democratic world. Maybe democracy institutions, we might have some tide because in some part of the Western allies, we have erosion of democracy. Again, Russia tried to erode this. Corruption as a player in this tug of war. Well, here Russia has an upper hand because that's the lubricant of Russian hybrid war that Russia tries to successfully erode internally the political systems. And plus now we see Russia adding up some of the concepts for their benefit, which is a so-called the Russian world, try to embrace the so-called the Slavic world. Also we see the Orthodox world concept is also part of the Russia strategy. And Black Sea clearly is a interesting dimension for this because most of the NATO allies or NATO aspirant countries are Orthodox countries, and we see Russia successfully interfering through this dimension in a political or the social life of the countries. So again, all this together in combination clearly shows us the importance of the Black Sea for the further, let's say, control or further influence on so-called the heartland, as Mackinder labeled it. And if we apply the Mackinder's thinking in this regard, who rules the Eastern Europe commands the heartland, who rules the heartland commands the world island, and who rules the world island controls the world. So, and with the heartland, it's not only Eurasia, but it includes the Middle East. That's also the reason to explain why Putin was so obsessed with this concept of the Eurasian Union, pulling together his side of the rope to pull his influence and to win this battle. Luckily, we are not there yet, just the opposite. We see more forward-leaning thinking in that regard, and even more offensive, which never was case before, even until 2016. I mean 2016 because it was a NATO summit in Warsaw when first time this contradiction with Russia was formally imprinted in communique, saying that Russia is one of the major threats for the NATO. And again, going to NATO, as Minister Linkevičius initially mentioned, NATO will be a decisive player how this tug-of-war will develop on the Black Sea region. We've seen on the recent NATO summit the new plans and the report of NATO 2030. We clearly see that US or the NATO's global power status has been challenged by Russia, but again, Black Sea would be a wider Black Sea region would be a clear demonstration where this contradiction and in which direction this geopolitical game will evolve. Strengthening NATO's political role was important besides military, because NATO has to play bigger role in an international order, and what is happening in the wider Black Sea will clearly determine what would be new architecture of European or Euro-Atlantic security, and therefore affecting a new world order. Regional frameworks. It was important NATO in 2030 report mentioned the regional frameworks, because we see like a single country veto or the blockage of the decisions, while there are important regional processes going on. So instead of applying a blanket solution, strategy should include some kind of regional tailored and regional players having a more say, particularly when it comes areas like wider Black Sea region. Implementation of the decisions. Yes, as I mentioned in the beginning, until 2008, Bucharest Summit decision will be implemented. That's a grace period for Russia to act and prevent this decision happening, or just to disappear this decision from the NATO agenda. We see they spend a lot of resources somehow to remove this 2008 Bucharest Summit phrase on Ukraine and Georgia from the further NATO documents. Unsuccessfully so far. I hope it will be kept until soon materialized. And I think higher level political dialogue. Somehow my fear is that this geopolitical discussion became a victim of a more bureaucratic solutions rather than political and strategical thinking. So going back to the General Hodges' point, I think we need a political and strategic thinking rather than bureaucratic patches or the fixes to the problem. I will stop here, and I look forward for our further discussion.
Thank you, Batu. Let's turn it over to Dato next.
Thank you, Maya, and thank you to FPRI for organizing this. It's actually a little difficult to speak after my three distinguished colleagues. I'm risking to repeat several points, and then I'll try to be brief, and then go through my points again. Russian hybrid war and its malign influence has been it continues in our region. And then let me pick from the point where Batu stopped, that calling this period from announcing Georgia's and Ukraine's future membership until actual membership. The period is a grace period for Russia to do its to have a free hand for its malign influence. I think that there are many similarities when we speak with Russian hybrid war from country to country, including this, and of course, when it comes to Georgia and Ukraine, we have occupied zones, and then Ukraine has active active military. Well, at least they have active fighting in eastern Ukraine with the Russians and the Russian-backed separatists. But also there are other components of this hybrid war, which is penetration of special services and propaganda, as well as economic dependency. Well, lately we all see that corruption is increasingly becoming weapon of war in hands of Russia, and of course, to withstand all this pressure, to withstand Russian hybrid war, the nations need to strengthen its resilience and then increase the cooperation that would suppress this, that would provide the adequate answers to Russian different components of the Russian hybrid war. So for our region, I think that let me little bit expand on what we should be doing as a nation, and what should nations, the Russian neighboring countries should be doing as to strengthen its resilience. So first of all, it has been mentioned, and I cannot agree more, that restoring democratic credentials is a vitally important for Georgia. So what we see is a backsliding of democracy, and the Georgia's importance grows with with maturity of its democracy. So the backslide of democracy, weakening of democratic institutions, and losing the democratic credentials is losing our hand. So I think that the number one focus is we have to prioritize. So should we, of course, strengthening democratic institutions, strengthening democratic governance, judiciary, that also would affect positively to the Georgia's economic development and then the investment climate. One of the very important component when we speak about the Black Sea security and then the role of Russia, role of Georgia, while we are experiencing Russian pressures, I think that it's the most important is to develop the concept of strategic connectivity, which has been mentioned by General Hodges. We all see that the need in the South Caucasus to develop this concept of strategic connectivity that would include development of energy infrastructure, transportation, digital connectivity that are vitally important for entire region. Strategic connectivity for Georgia is a function that can strengthen region security, greatly support economic development, promote regional cooperation, as well as positively affect Georgia's NATO bid. For this purpose, we need to have a clear and concise transport infrastructure plan to develop that would include construction of an Aklia deep sea port, modernization of Georgian railway policies, policies that stimulate development of the logistic depots, proper management, and policies that would make Georgia transit tariffs more competitive and stimulate deeper cooperation between countries of that region. I think that promotion for promotion of foreign direct investments, removing barriers, and this issue is strongly connected. That I completely agree with General Hodges on this. That this issue is strongly connected with the strong institutions and then the strong judiciary, which we still have to work on. But also another important component for it, I think we have to develop the national legislation and national procedures for the national security screening of the foreign direct investment. Also, we have to develop limits and bans for the Russian capital and capital of questionable origin. Further, that would encourage first make our the long-term plans and investment plans much more safe, and encourage fair investors to come and then strengthen to be part of the infrastructure development. Defense infrastructure, and then I think that this is yet another component of the strengthening of Georgia's resilience. I think that Georgia should focus on the NATO host nation capabilities development of these capabilities should be made as a policy priority, and then defense infrastructure and modernization strategy as a part of the wider government infrastructure program. I think that these two, the development of concept of strategic connectivity and the host nation concept development, I think that they are supplementary components that would serve the same purpose. And I think that also it is important to have the support on this, to have our Western partners supporting this, and I think the support for democracies and democratic development in the region is a key. Strengthening ability of the frontline democracies to withstand pressure. I think that it should be one of those priorities that should be the priority for the West in the region. I agree also that increased military exercises and increased military presence in forms of the training centers, in forms of the exercises, trainings, and increased number of trainings with NATO countries should be also the part of it. Moving toward NATO expansion, and yes, I think that we have to find a way to maintain the dynamic. I think that I agree with Batu that Russia's main point is to make this issue disappear from the agenda of the West, and supporting, promoting investment and facilitation of the development of the hub, strategic hub, transit hub capabilities is also could be very useful. And then I think that this is the area where assistance should be streamlined. Current situation is before I stop, I have to say that we just before we started this session, we spoke about this op-ed that has been recently published, the Putin's op-ed that has been recently published, that recalling this so-called pseudo-historical propaganda already sound into his op-ed that Russia and Ukraine are similar, same nations, and then this, which is completely untrue, and then this is completely propaganda, and then this, since Soviet Union, the history was increasing more and more increasingly, was used for the propaganda purposes. Then at that time we even heard that this joke that Russia is a country with unpredictable past, that every leader writes his own history, but this time it's concerning, and I think that this was these words we are said on purpose, and I think that this is the sign that that we can see much more trouble brewing around our region. So I'll stop here and I'll be ready to answer questions if there are some.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for these remarks. I think there's a lot to discuss here. So I want to actually turn back to the remarks that General Hodges made. You said we have not competed in the past in the Black Sea region, and this is one of the reasons why there are now Russian troops in Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, in Nagorno-Karabakh. And you also predicted that it is going to be a long, hot summer in the Black Sea. If Putin's recent long op-ed article is any indication, he's preparing for more aggressive actions in the Black Sea, and particularly his business with Ukraine is far from finished. He seems to have a lot of ambitions when it comes to Ukraine. Russia is also preparing for its military exercises, Zapad military exercises, which will take place in Belarus and will, of course, affect the Baltic Sea region. With the Sea Breeze exercises, US, NATO, Ukraine co-hosted Sea Breeze exercises in the Black Sea. We've seen a lot of tensions and a lot of fear of escalation as well. So it wouldn't be a surprise if we see some type of additional military escalation, not just in Ukraine, but perhaps in the Black Sea itself. If you were in the decision-making seat, and if you decided to, okay, now we will compete, what would you do? Want to either prevent what is obviously coming, and again, hopefully we're all wrong about this, but also, what would be some of the immediate steps that you would take to calm down the situation in this region?
Well, first of all, the most important step that we can all take is to raise awareness in Washington and in Brussels of the strategic importance of the greater Black Sea region, to get people fired up about it. And that requires effort on the part of several senior leaders. I would be thrilled if President Biden would announce today, while he's hosting German Chancellor Merkel in Washington, to say, hey, Vladimir, we don't have a strategy for the region yet, but I have my best people working on it. And we're going to have a strategy that pushes back on Russian illegal activity, Russian use of lawfare, illegal claims, the totally false narrative that you've alluded to already, the fairy tale out of the Kremlin about Ukraine was always part of Russia, they're one people, et cetera, et cetera. So people have to be clear-eyed about who it is we're talking about. People that live around the periphery of Russia, as in Georgia and Lithuania, know what it's like. But the further away from Russia that you get, people are dismissive. I live in Frankfurt, Germany, and I've had very, very smart, super educated, good people say, come on, Ben, Crimea was always part of Russia. Or, why are you always, we need to keep a dialogue. What a load of horseshit, that is always pervade from the Kremlin, and the West doesn't push back on it. And this is where my president, as well as leaders in Brussels and in other European capitals, have got to push back. Why is the Black Sea important? I love Georgia. I love Ukraine. I've met so many good people from there. And I love the history, but that's not strategy. Why should anybody in Washington or Brussels, other than for personal reasons and philosophical reasons, why should they care about what Russia does in Georgia or Ukraine or Moldova? And I think getting that out is step one. The economic potential that I talked about a little bit earlier, huge benefit for multiple nations if you can get that East-West economic corridor going. It's enforcing international law. The question from Christian that's I saw in the list of questions, is it a NATO lake or a Russian lake? It's international water. It's nobody's lake. Technically that's the case. However, the point of her question, I think, is that if we don't act, then Russia uses it as its own lake. And it is, in fact, the Black Sea is the launching pad for all of Russia's malign activity in the South Caucasus, in the Balkans, obviously in Ukraine, but also in Syria. Without Russian support, the Assad regime would be history, long time ago. But instead, because Russia was able to keep the Assad regime standing, there now are about 3 million refugees from that civil war that are in Turkey and in Europe. That's not an accident. This was weaponization of refugees by the Kremlin, deliberate, which added to the stress and pressure that Batu mentioned earlier about it exploits the seams and cracks and weaknesses between member states of the EU and NATO.
Thank you so much. I think I want to thank our audience members for sending in their questions, and please, keep them coming. I have a really good question here that I think has been on a lot of people's minds for a while, and this is from Nino Gelashvili at RFERL. Is it possible to list the preconditions necessary for the U.S. to place its forces in a foreign state? In Georgia, for instance, General Hodges, you mentioned if Georgia is to invite more US and NATO military presence, it would be a good idea. So I want to ask you on the US side about the likelihood, but also what the preconditions would be. And then I also want to ask Batu and Dato whether they see the willingness or the interest from the current Georgian government in inviting the more U.S. military presence there. So let's start with you, General Hodges.
So, of course, I'm talking about infrastructure that would support rotational forces. Nothing big, not like what we've established in Poland or even in Romania, but something that would make it easier and smoother for when U.S. troops show up in Georgia 2 or 3 times a year for exercises. So perhaps it's something simple like ammunition storage or maintenance facilities, or for the Navy, to encourage, make it easier for when the Navy makes port calls to have some sort of a footprint that's there where they can do maintenance. I know at one time U.S. Transportation Command had talked about maybe establishing some sort of a footprint there at the air base outside of Tbilisi. That again would make it easier to do rotations. But the real value of those things is so that there's an American presence that is a message to our friends in Georgia, but also to the Kremlin that this is the competition I'm talking about. That this is where this area matters to us, and we're going to invest resources. Now, NATO, of course, already has a training sort of infrastructure there in Georgia. I think so. There is something to build on. One last thing. Our friend Luke Coffey, and I think anybody that cares about Georgia and the Caucasus knows, of course, Luke Coffey, and he once suggested that, if the U.S. was looking for a place for an over-the-horizon force that could react to problems in Syria or maybe even as far away as Afghanistan, why not base them in Georgia? You've got gigantic airfield there, great places to train, to be ready. So add that to the list of sort of lily pads, if you will, that the United States could use for strategic reach. All of this would have to be at the invitation of Georgia, of course.
Thank you. So how likely is such an invitation to come?
Well, Maya, thanks for this question. And I think it is one of the most important questions or issues to be worked on in tiny details, because the idea and the concept is important, but also the tiny details. I don't know what Georgian government is doing or will do. I rest little hope on their political will. Well, instead of discussing these issues, currently their major talking point is why we see state capture or democratic backsliding, instead of really being busy with the strategic issues. So But I clearly know what I should have done if it would be, let's say, my call on these issues. First of all, as General Hodges mentioned, the changing military balance or the geopolitical context really gives a favorable condition to create, as he perfectly labeled, the little lily pads for further military deployment, because Georgia is one of the most pro-American, pro-Western country in the region with a strategic location. But also looking from the Georgian perspective as well, this is not only the infrastructure that will benefit the United States. This will benefit Georgian economy as well. That could have been a very good public-private partnership. Georgia had approximately 30 different level of airfields since the Soviet Union, because Georgia was a NATO frontier country for Soviet Union. And these are the perfect locations, could be used for the commercial, logistic purposes, but with the condition that for potential needs to be expanded in further NATO or US military application, whatever will be, either it's training or some contingencies in a wider region. So that is something that would generate and stimulate Georgian economy. So that would not be that Georgian economy will depend only on tourism or agriculture. It would bring a more know-how how to manage this logistical infrastructure, will bring a more technology-wise developed logistical warehousing system, interconnected system, and that would bring Georgia regional function. And if we look the history in the different parts of the world, that type of military function plus economic on top of it really made countries progress significantly, whether it's in Asia, in Europe. So that is the model where Georgia should have been looking and designing its grand strategy, especially in the post-COVID period, because the COVID really deteriorated the usual supply chains, especially the Chinese role. And one of the questions, by the way, I will mention, because I saw it in the Q&A box, is the China's role. Chinese interests largely, at least as we see, coincide with the Russian interest in the region to push out United States and the West. So just the opposite, it would be Georgia's benefit if we invest in modernizing infrastructure, building a new deep sea port, having a more military compatible infrastructure, a so-called host nation infrastructure, and on top of it, a new economic function. Because with this disruption of the traditional supply lines, the logistics are shifting towards bringing supply of the goods closer to the markets. And Georgia is perfectly positioned to be the European Union major supplier in terms of the logistic support of the supply chains. So these are the initial thoughts, but of course it needs a lot of detailed and nitty-gritty work.
Well, I think that Batu actually answered the question. That's only one thing I would like to say on answering your question, Maya, is that, you know, it is written, you will know them by their fruits. So do we see all these things happening in Georgia? Development of the deep sea port, strengthening Georgia's host nation capabilities, strengthening military infrastructures. So, well, the investing in this strategic hub concept by government, we don't see that. So I think that this is, I completely agree. I think that this is a absolutely necessary component. Second component is to, again, restore Georgia's democratic credentials. That is vitally important for our nation, but it is also it also will have influence over the on the region. And in general, if we look, especially if we look on the history, and then history, especially the history of the NATO expansion, I think that the U.S. bilateral arrangement role is huge. It was a case with Baltic countries when they had this Baltic Charter signed with US prior to NATO membership. I think that is strengthening bilateral military cooperation, strengthening bilateral military arrangements with the US are the key toward NATO membership and as well accomplishing Bucharest decisions.
I think, we cannot discuss the complex issues in the Black Sea region without bringing up Turkey. And General Hodges mentioned how it is imperative for the US and for the West to fix its relationship with Turkey. Let's talk about that a little bit more, because obviously a Turkey-Russia alliance is posing a lot of challenges to these smaller nations in the Black Sea region as well. I'm sure most of you have seen that Senator Jeff Flake will be the next US ambassador to Turkey. What do you see, General Hodges, what do you see at the top of his agenda as he takes this post?
Well, somebody like Jeff Flake to be our ambassador is a great choice, because this guy is a serious strategic thinker, and he'll bring some real credibility. Now, his number one job should be to make sure that Turkey and the United States, that we begin to reestablish trust in each other. I think Turkey has zero confidence in Europe and has zero confidence in the United States. For a variety of reasons, but I think that Europe and the United States also have zero confidence in Turkey in many ways. There is no alliance between Russia and Turkey. Turkey knows that their future is with the West, but clearly Russia can inflict pain on Turkey, as they did when they put several sanctions in place after Turkey shot down the Russian aircraft that was repeatedly violating Turkish airspace. You remember back a few years ago near the Syrian border. So Russia does have economic influence over Turkey, but there's not going to be an alliance. And that's why I said that strategy is about the map, the geography, and interests. And if you take the map of the Black Sea region and move it to the center of the map, move the Black Sea to the center of the map. Usually the Black Sea is in the bottom right-hand corner of all maps of any headquarters in Europe. And so Turkey is at the very bottom right-hand corner. But if you move that up towards the middle, then you realize the very, very important role that the Black Sea has, and that Turkey has, not only as the cork in the bottle, if you will, because it controls the Turkish Straits, thanks to Montreux Convention, but also as a bulwark against Islamic extremism. And I think that we have got to find ways to rebuild this trust and not let a relationship be based on what I think is a terrible decision by Ankara on the purchase of the S-400. It was a bad decision, and it was in fake or false, dishonest reasons are given by Ankara for doing it. And Ankara, frankly, has work to do. They have the worst reputation on the planet, except for maybe one other country, for how journalists are treated. For a member of NATO to have such a terrible press media environment, that's not acceptable. So, and Ambassador Flake, if he's confirmed, will have a full-time job, and he'll be under pressure from a variety of different angles.
Thank you. I want to ask Batu and Dato how they see Turkey's role in the region, and especially in terms of its relationship with Georgia, but also Armenia and Azerbaijan. How do you view the idea that, yes, Russia has placed peacekeeping forces in Nagorno-Karabakh, so-called peacekeeping forces, but Turkey also has a really big role in this picture. How do you see Turkey's role as an arbiter in the region? This is sort of newer, and of course this idea of then the 6 countries platform, which seems again, completely unlikely and intangible for countries like Georgia, but it's still there. It's still on the table. So maybe you could comment on this a little bit.
Yes, Maya, Turkey is a very important player in the region. Turkey is after the United States, one of the most vocal supporter of Georgia's NATO integration. And I think that has a lot of strategic sense behind it. Plus, we see how Russia is trying to exploit some of the vulnerabilities that Turkey has in terms of spoiling Turkey's relation with the neighboring countries. Let's say Georgia. We see a lot of anti-Turkish propaganda in Georgia, directly or indirectly supported by Russia or its proxies in media or in so-called NGOs or political actors. So it has a reason. Russia knows that if let's say Turkish-Georgian relations are at soar, then it means that Russia has a much wider space to manipulate problems. So one example, and I really do not like to place on the same level of discussion Russian problem and issues with Turkey. That are two different things. Turkey is a partner, Turkey is an ally, and Russia is not. But what Russia propaganda is trying to do is, let's say in Georgia, that yes, Russia is occupant, but Turkey is also occupant. And they are investing heavily in that narrative. Also, I think in terms of the recent Nagorno-Karabakh war, that gives now the outcome of this conflict, whether we like the dynamics of it, it's a now accomplished fact, what we have right now, but it gives a good opportunity for Turkey and for Armenia to reestablish their relations. I would imagine how big breakthrough could be if Turkey and Armenia would resume its diplomatic relations and economic interaction. Georgia would benefit a lot because it will sideline Russia or Russia's influences in the region. So these are a lot of good opportunities there. But I think this type of opportunities to be seized really requires clear-cut US strategy in the region. If this void is left and this vacuum, then I expect that Russia will further deteriorate situation, use the leverages to create some provocations on the ground. And we've seen earlier as well, when there is a clear-cut US strategy and interest to have a foothold, political, economic, or military, then things align according to the this strategic interest. So we need a clearly expressed and demonstrated political will, and I think all these previous problems that has been mentioned can be solved. Some easily, some might take some time. But again, everything that will break this Russian narrative of seeding mistrust between the regional players is good for the regional stability and security.
Yes, I agree. Just Turkey, I don't think that it is reasonable to compare Turkey's role in the region and Russia's role, even though we can increasingly see that different articles, they speak of this strategic alliance between them. I don't think that this is the case. I completely agree with General Hodges' point that it would be beneficial for everybody, including the regional countries, to restore the strength, to restore the good relations between US and Turkey, and then EU and Turkey. Turkey is much, of course, as Batu said, it's a strong supporters of Georgia's NATO membership. Turkey is strong supporters of sovereignty and territorial integrity of all regional players, including Georgia and Ukraine. They never actually even questioned the unlawfulness of the Russian occupation and then in Ukraine's case, annexation of part of its territory. Having said that, I think that this proposal, which is floating around about the Six Nations, the regional platform, the Six Nations regional platform that would include three South Caucasus nations, Russia, Turkey, and Iran. I think it's completely unacceptable for Georgia, and I don't think that something good can come up out of it, and I don't think that it would be reasonable or it would be in the interest of Georgia to even go deeper in considering this proposal. So this is in brief what I would say about it.
Can I just add that I agree completely with Dato there. The Kremlin has zero interest in any sort of win-win outcomes, zero. And any kind of agreement with them should be viewed very, very skeptically. That doesn't mean we shouldn't talk with them and that you can't trade and do things. We need to, but you have to have your eyes wide open and understand the false narrative that emanates from the Kremlin nonstop, and that they have never lived up to any agreement unless they were forced to.
Thank you. I have another audience question here that talks about how do religious differences play into the Black Sea equation, and that kind of brings me back to the current situation in Georgia, the current human rights situation in Georgia. So I actually want to ask Dato to comment on tell us a little bit about what's happening in Georgia right now in terms of human rights, but both Dato and Batu have previous government experience in Georgia, as Dato is the Minister of Defense, Batu is the Deputy Minister of Defense. You have both represented Georgia as ambassadors to the United States at different times. So, I think right now, the way a lot of the experts are interpreting this idea of the attacks on the Pride rally as a societal issue, but what is the government's role here? What should the government have done or be doing differently to mitigate the situation, but also to reassure its Western allies that well, simply put, that most of Georgia is not xenophobic and most of Georgia is not homophobic. What are the responsibilities on the government, not just the civil society right now, to perhaps restore peace, but also somehow rebuild the image of Georgia as a country with a society that is committed to sort of these Western values and universal human rights?
Well, I think that what we see in Georgia, it's actually the backslide of democracy, and I think that what happened last week here is that I think that the big responsibility, the huge responsibility of the government, of the current government, I think they green-lighted this violence. As their popularity is going down, they decided, it's my reading of the situation, as their popularity is decreasing and then their numbers, the poll numbers go down, they decided to play this card of ultra-right radicals to embrace them. And I think that what happened is just it's not, and I agree completely with you that it's not the will of majority of Georgians, or the overwhelming majority of Georgians disapprove this attack. And that what we saw on the 5th, it was a direct attack on media representatives, and before that was green-lighted by the Prime Minister's statement. And I think that there is the political price that they have to pay for this, and then they will probably, as I see the situation here. Again, the democracy and the human rights and the democratic credentials, Georgia's democratic credentials, are of course first of all important for our nation's well-being and the development, and this is the way the Georgians want to see. This is the democratic Georgia is what Georgia, most overwhelming majority of Georgians want to see. But it is also important for the region. Georgia's role in the region, among other things, always was that setting the example how democracy can be successful, and I think that we have to stick with this role, and I think that is the full potential. As of the religious differences, well, in South Caucasus, I think that we more or less learned how to live together, the representatives of different confessions. Azerbaijan, I think it's my personal opinion, it is the most secular Muslim country in the world, in my opinion. I think that it's my personal opinion of this, and I think that the religious conflicts, they don't have the ground. At least that it's not really the strategic factor here, and I think, and of course, promotion of the regional cooperation is one of the key, most important issues. As going back to my previous point, that why Georgia is, or Georgian democracy is important for the region, is that if Georgian democracy is successful, that would encourage reformers in many countries of the region, and then strengthen the democratic forces in many countries of the region. And I think that it would be beneficial for entire region and for the security and stability. That's why I think that this hybrid war and the Russian propaganda, in the first place, is targeting democratic credentials of Georgia.
Yes, I just a few comments to add on this. First of all, on religion. Well, one of the factors that has not been part of the conflict post-Soviet geopolitical developments in the region was that the religion was not a factor in the conflicts. Though Zbigniew Brzezinski called Caucasus as the Eurasian Balkans, but the one difference was that the religious has never been factor. It was more ethnic or maybe historical, but religious never. Though Russia several times attempted to inject this. And the same goes with Georgia, because the tolerance has been one of the values of the Georgian statecraft. And I think we will maintain, and those who are resorting to the violence in the name of the religion, I think they are minority, but organized minority. And here comes the problem. The organization of this minority is on the account of the government of Georgia, because for their interest to maintain the power under the informal rule of Ivanishvili, this violence or the fear factor is one of the rules. And it's not, Georgia is not exemption, unfortunately. Many autocrats did the same in different parts of the world. And unfortunately, we see a lot of similarities how Putin consolidated his power in Russia, and now how current Georgian government is doing. It's the same playbook with the same sequences of applying different tools. And it's really, notwithstandanding that this is an organized minority, still it's scary. And also when it comes to the religion, intra-religion factor is a problem. In Ukraine, we see two Orthodox churches, one pro-Russian, one pro-Western. I think formally that's not the case in Georgia, but again, we see the same problem. We have clerics clearly promoting pro-Russian sentiments within their parish, but we see a lot of Western educated young clerics who are very open-minded, pro-Western. They clearly see where the real values are for Georgian society and Georgian state. That's why to embolden this or to win this fight with irresponsible government who is clinging to the power, and also the Russian infiltration, we need a more clearly demonstrated steps toward the West. That's why when it comes to Georgia's future, we often say Georgia is more than Georgia, because there are a lot of problems that are in the region that is inherited in Georgian statecraft. And if we successfully solve it, we set a good precedent for the others. That's why we need a more Western presence here. And I think that will be a strategic success of democracy in general, not only in Georgia or not only in the region.
Dato, please go ahead. You had your hand raised.
No, I'm sorry. I just
No problem.
by mistake. Yeah.
Batu, I had a question.
Yeah, I
from...
said already.
Okay.
Probably I just pushed it.
That's all right. Batu, I had a question from Europa Pladze that says, do you see the Russian hand in the recent developments taking place in Georgia? So I think you answered that question very well. So I want to pose this next question to General Hodges. Sorry, it's a tough one, but when the US can come so close to losing its democracy, what signal does that send to both the anti-democratic nations as well as the democratic nations around the world? I know, we've had a tough few years in the United States in terms of our own democratic backsliding and challenges, but yes, I would, love to hear your comment on this.
No, I love the question, actually. The signal it sends is that a reminder that this is not free, it's not a given, and you can't take your hands off of the wheel or take your eye off of it. You have to fight every single day. And you and many of the listeners probably know or are aware that in the United States, we fought a terrible civil war in 1861 to 1865. And you imagine the population of the United States back then, which was far less than half of what it is now. And yet 600,000 people were killed in that conflict. And we suffered or went through terrible times post-Civil War during what was called Reconstruction. And then we had challenged gross violations of human rights of African Americans for decades after that. So it's never been easy, not from the Declaration of Independence to today. It's never been easy. And so having strong liberal institutions that can resist all the different pressures from left and right is really important. Now, what happened on January 6th was a terrible day. Of course, I watched it like almost everybody else did, and imagining how much worse it could have been if some of these idiots had gotten hold of our vice president or Speaker Pelosi. I mean, this was a mob. And what's also discouraging is that about 10% of the people who have been arrested and charged were former military. So this is not a ballet. This is competition, and it's serious. I would also say, though, keep in mind that that very night, after all of these domestic terrorists were cleared out of the Capitol, our vice president came back in with the Congress, and they continued their duty of certifying the election, the results from all of the 50 states. And that same week, the president, who helped incite that riot, was impeached for a second time. And the Supreme Court rejected, I think, 60 different challenges to the election outcome. So in other words, our democracy is actually very strong. The court system withstood huge pressures. The Congress did its job. And we had a transfer of power on the 20th of January. It's important. I don't want to overstate this, but the ideal of what the United States was intended to be is almost unreachable. We're not there, but we're still fighting for it. We're still moving towards it. That's the signal that I think must be sent out.
Thank you very much. I want to turn to a question that has been sort of lingering throughout the Q&A, and this is kind of the turning to the opposite of democracy, China's role, Russia-China cooperation, China's interest in the Black Sea. I'll ask one of these questions. It seems reasonable that Russia and China would coordinate any major military moves against Ukraine and Taiwan. The US would have a difficult time responding to both at the same time. If either one of you want to take this question, just generally about this idea of Russia-China collaboration or deepening cooperation, but also just China's role in the Black Sea. It's been sort of a mixed record, and I think it's more about how we expect it to unfold rather than what problems China may be posing in the Black Sea at this very moment.
I'll start, if I may. I mentioned China earlier in one of my answers. Again, we've seen a striking coincidence. Let's say I will give you examples and then give my kind of an assessment what we are witnessing or what can we see in the future. Let's say when the COVID broke out, there was a lot of propaganda narratives, and especially anti-American. And one of the narrative was that Lugar laboratories, that are the huge asset that Georgia possesses because of defense threat reduction initiative of the United States since 90s, fighting possible biological threats. That been a target of Russian propaganda and Chinese, and their narrative was strikingly similar. So that this virus was developed in American labs in Georgia, etc., etc. So this clearly shows that when things come to the big strategic issues, the Chinese and Russian interest in our part of the world coincides. Another parallel track is the logistic infrastructure, and we've seen the Chinese efforts to dominate major, let's say, logistical pockets around European market and the United States. So let's say, depth diplomacy of China, how they are acquiring strategic assets, soon could be seen in Georgia as well when it comes to the Poti port, because we see that this economic free zone is now under the Chinese Commerce Bank, and also this type of corrupt interest has a local partners. And unfortunately, the degree of corruption in Georgia is increasing, and that's exactly what happened in Sri Lanka or Piraeus or some other parts. So we are trying to follow these patterns closely and also track some of the Chinese companies' activities, mostly those ones who are capitalizing on corruption gaps or black holes in the governance. And plus, when it comes to the Black Sea role, Black Sea, again, as I said, in the post-COVID supply chain rearrangement is acquiring more importance for the Chinese strategy. So we might witness increased Chinese interest. Though, again, it's a combination of some of the Russian interests, because most of the Chinese companies who are operating or trying to operate in Georgia are coming through Russia. So they are the companies that are established in Russia, and then they are expanding their activities here in Georgia and in the Black Sea.
Thank you, Batu. Unfortunately, we have to end this discussion here. This is all the time we have for today, but I would like to ask our audience to keep an eye on FPRI's website, fpri.org, where the products of our Black Sea initiative, the writings, the upcoming events will all be posted. These are issues that we're deeply invested in and will continue to explore. I want to give my special thanks to General Ben Hodges, Minister Linas Linkevicius, of course to Datu Siharulidze and Batu Kutelia, who are not just two of the discussants today, but they also represent our partner organization in Georgia, the Atlantic Council of Georgia, and that cooperation is very valuable to FPRI. So thank you for all the collaborative efforts. Thank you to our audience. The event recording will go up on our YouTube page today if you would like to go back and listen to some of the remarks again. We'll meet again. Thank you.
Thank you.